Nobody tells you what a queen looks like when she's losing. They show you the gowns. The pearls. The measured half-smile deployed like a flag at a state occasion. They show you the wave, the particular, practiced wave, neither too eager nor too cold, the wave that says I have done this 10,000 times and I will do it 10,000 more. They don't show you the moment the composure cracks. They don't show you the hands. I was standing close enough to see her hands. I have spent 11 years in royal protection. 11 years learning that what happens in front of the cameras and what happens 2 feet behind the cameras are not the same country. They share a border. They share a language. But, the people who live in those two places? They are strangers to each other. I thought I understood that. I thought I had catalogued every variety of institutional silence, every flavor of diplomatic smile, every species of politely managed tension that lives inside the bones of a monarchy trying to survive itself. Then, came that afternoon in the Long Gallery at Windsor. And, I understood that I had understood nothing. This is not a story about crowns. It is a story about two women standing 6 feet apart in a corridor that smelled of beeswax and old grief and, the space between them, which was not 6 feet at all. It was everything. The day it began, I was watching a corgi. That detail embarrasses me now. The entire machinery of the British monarchy was experiencing what my supervisor, Chief Inspector Harland, would later describe in his incident report as an unscheduled interpersonal escalation, which is the institutional equivalent of calling a house fire a thermal management event, and I, Officer Second Class Priya Mehta, 11-year veteran of the Royal Protection Command, was watching a corgi named Geoffrey attempt to eat a 16th-century tapestry. Geoffrey had been at the tapestry for approximately 4 minutes. It depicted the Battle of Bosworth Field. Henry Tudor was losing a leg to Geoffrey's teeth. I should have been watching the corridor. I should have been watching the doors. Instead I was thinking, does anyone brief the dogs about what's priceless? The answer, clearly, was no. The door at the far end of the long gallery opened, not the main door, the servant's door, the one fitted with pneumatic hinges so it never made a sound, and Catherine came through it alone. This was wrong. Catherine did not move through Windsor alone. None of them did, not really, but Catherine especially. There was a protocol written specifically around her movements, a protocol I had memorized the way you memorize the layout of a building you might one day need to exit in the dark. She moved with a constellation of people around her, at minimum, her PPO, her lady-in-waiting, and a communications officer. At minimum. The constellation had been known to expand to 11 on difficult days. Today she had no one. She was wearing what I would later learn was described in her engagements log as an informal working outfit: dark trousers, a cream blouse, her hair half up in the way she wore it when she wasn't expecting to be seen. Seen meaning, photographed. There was a version of Catherine that existed for cameras and a version that existed for rooms she believed were empty. The long gallery, she had believed, was empty. It was not empty. It had me. It had Geoffrey. It had what remained of Henry Tudor. She didn't see me yet. She was walking quickly, not the processed walk, not the walk they'd trained into her over 20+ years of public life, the one that covered ground while appearing to float above it. This was a different walk. This was a woman moving away from something. Her hands were at her sides, slightly open, fingers spread, the way hands look when the body can't decide whether to make fists. I pulled back against the wall. This is instinct in my line of work, not concealment, exactly, not deception. More like, I am furniture. I am part of the architecture. Whatever is happening here, it is not happening to me. She stopped in the middle of the gallery. Just stopped. Like a clock someone had reached in and silenced. The painting above her head was a Van Dyck, Charles I on horseback, imperious, inevitable, oblivious to everything history was about to do to him. I noticed it the way you notice things when you're trying very hard not to notice the person in front of you. Detail displacement. A thing I'd learned early in this job: when you accidentally witness something private, you choose an object and you study it until the private thing resolves itself. I studied the horse's left nostril. The horse had an extraordinary left nostril. Catherine stood under the king who would lose his head and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. A gesture. Small. The kind of gesture that contains an entire argument. Then, she lowered her hand. She breathed. She straightened her shoulders in that specific, deliberate way, not the way you straighten shoulders when you're fixing your posture, but the way you do it when straightening your shoulders is the only thing keeping you together. A decision made in the spine. I had seen soldiers do it. I had seen paramedics do it in the corridor outside operating theaters. I had never seen it look so exhausting as it looked on her. She saw me. For a moment, 2 seconds, maybe 3, neither of us moved. Her expression went through something. I cannot adequately describe the sequence. It was the visible process of a person deciding how to be in front of a witness. Which version to deploy. How much of the corridor to reveal. She chose the one I recognized. The measured almost smile. The level eyes. Officer Mehta, she said. Your Royal Highness. I straightened. Standard. A beat passed. Geoffrey, she said, looking past me to where the corgi had achieved a new and more ambitious grip on the tapestry, is an absolute menace. Yes, ma'am. She walked to him. Crouched. Geoffrey, without shame or apology, abandoned the Battle of Bosworth Field and pressed his entire face against her shin. She put a hand on his head, not petting, just resting, the way you put a hand on something solid when the ground is moving. She didn't look up. How long have you been in here? Approximately 8 minutes, ma'am. A pause. She was calculating. I knew what she was calculating. The last 4 of which I was studying a tapestry, I added. This was a violation of several protocols and all of my training. You do not volunteer information to members of the royal family that implies you have observed anything they would prefer unobserved. You do not attempt to manage their privacy with your own candor. You do not make jokes, implied or otherwise, at moments of visible tension. I had done all 3 in one sentence. She looked up. The tapestry, she said. Bosworth Field, ma'am. The one Geoffrey was eating. Henry Tudor's left leg, specifically. It's looking poorly. Something shifted in her face. Not a smile, exactly. Something that had been a smile in a previous life. He has terrible taste, she said. She meant the dog. She might have meant something else. She stood up. Geoffrey looked briefly devastated and then redirected his attention to her shoe. I'm going to ask you something, she said, and I'm going to ask you as a person, not as a representative of the command. Ma'am. If you happen to encounter something in this gallery, a private moment, an emotional irregularity, the sort of thing that ends up in reports, what would appear in that report? I looked at her steadily. 11 years. I had written reports containing the words individual observed distress and subject required temporary privacy and no security concern identified. I had written those words many times. I had written them for people who had lost children, received diagnoses, absorbed betrayals, stood under Van Dyck paintings pressing the backs of their hands to their mouths. Nothing of note occurred in the long gallery at 14:17 hours, I said. The corgi was removed from the Bosworth tapestry. Minor conservation concern. No further incidents. She held my eyes for a moment. Thank you, Officer Mehta. She walked past me toward the main door. Composed. Entire. The walk was back, the processed walk, the walk that covered ground while appearing not to. She stopped at the door. Did not turn around. The horse in the Van Dyck, she said. Extraordinary left nostril. She opened the door and she was gone. I stood there. Geoffrey sat on my foot. What had happened before the long gallery, what she was walking away from, I did not learn until the following morning, when Harlan called me into the briefing room and sat down with the expression he reserved for situations that would require him to use the phrase extraordinary sensitivity approximately 17 times. The briefing room smelled of filter coffee and institutional carpet and the particular low-grade anxiety that lives permanently in buildings where significant things happen to powerful people. Harlan poured 2 coffees without asking, which meant whatever he was about to tell me was going to require them. "Yesterday afternoon," he said. "Long gallery. You were on post." "I was." "Incident involving Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales." "No incident occurred, sir." He looked at me over the rim of his mug. Harlan had been doing this job for 26 years. His face was a carefully maintained neutral, the kind of neutral that contains multitudes and reveals none of them. "Priya," he said. "Not Officer Mehta. Priya." Which meant he had already decided something. "There's context," he said, "that you need to have." He told me about the meeting. Not all of it. Not even most of it. He told me the version that was appropriate for me to know, the architecture without the interior, the map without the territory. But even that version was enough. There had been a meeting that afternoon in the king's private study. Senior family members. A discussion, he used the word discussion with the weight of a man who had been told to use it, about the schedule for the upcoming Commonwealth tour. About precedence. About who stood where in official photographs. About whose name appeared first on the program for the state dinner in Canberra. About, in other words, everything and nothing. Meetings like this happened. In any institution they happened, the nominally administrative discussion that is actually a negotiation of power, of hierarchy, of who matters and how much and who gets to decide. In most institutions, the people who leave those meetings go to their offices and close their doors and process whatever happened in private. In this institution, there were no private doors. There were rooms like the Long Gallery. That was as close as it got. "Queen Camilla," Harlan said, and then he paused. Set down his coffee. Her composure was, he stopped again. The level of tension in that meeting was significant. Atypical. He was being careful. He was being so careful. "And, Her Royal Highness the Princess," I said, keeping my voice the same shape as was. "Left the meeting early." He picked his coffee back up. "Voluntarily. At the recommendation of her PPO. Marcus, then. Her protection officer, Marcus Adeyemi. I knew Marcus. We had done our advanced training together 12 years ago in a rainy field in Herefordshire. Marcus was the kind of man who would, if he saw a person he was responsible for beginning to pull apart at the seams, quietly place himself between them and whatever was pulling. Catherine had left the meeting. Marcus had walked her to the corridor. She had walked the rest of the way alone. Into the Long Gallery. Where I had been studying a horse's left nostril. "The situation," Harlan said, "is ongoing. The tour. The discussions. That," he picked up his pen, set it down again. "There are pressures that are not publicly visible. There rarely are, sir." He gave me the look he gave me when I said things that were technically accurate and professionally inadvisable. "What I'm telling you," he said, "is that the protection posture around HRH the Princess is being reviewed. Informally." He paused. "And that you are being considered for a role in that." I said nothing. "Not because of yesterday," he said. "The timing is coincidental." "Of course, sir." He held my gaze for an additional 3 seconds, which was Harlan for, "We both know it is not coincidental, but we are both going to behave as though it is." "Any questions?" "Just one," I said. "Go ahead." "Jeffrey. The corgi. Is he ours to manage, or does he fall under a separate command structure?" Harlan picked up his pen again. The edge of his mouth did something very small. "He falls," he said, "under absolutely no one's command structure. He is an autonomous entity operating under diplomatic immunity. You'll learn to work around him." I want to be precise about what I understood and what I didn't, standing in that briefing room at 8:43 on a Tuesday morning with cold filter coffee and a new assignment. I understood the mechanics. Protection posture. Visible presence. Close quarters rotation. The language of my job, the vocabulary I had spent 11 years learning to think in. What I did not understand, could not understand yet, was the weight of what I was being placed inside. Institutions have their own gravity. Royal institutions have a gravity so old it has become indistinguishable from the air. You don't feel it as a force. You feel it as atmosphere. You breathe it in. You exhale it. And, over time you stop noticing that every breath you take is weighted, that every step you take is on ground that belongs to something much older and, much less forgiving than you. Catherine had been breathing that air for over 2 decades. What it had cost her, what it continued to cost her, was not in any briefing document I would ever read. I learned it in increments. In the weeks that followed, rotating through the closer proximity detail, I learned it the way you learn anything in this job, by watching. By being furniture. By choosing objects to study. I learned it in the way she walked into rooms where the air had recently been disturbed. The extra half second at thresholds, not hesitation, not fear, more like calibration. The way a person takes a breath before they surface. I learned it in the hands. Open at her sides when she was managing something. Loose and easy when she was genuinely at ease, which happened less frequently than the public narrative suggested and, more frequently than the institutional narrative allowed. I learned it in Geoffrey, who had the run of certain corridors and, the theological certainty that wherever Catherine was constituted the correct location for a corgi to be. I learned that she let him follow her. That she didn't shoo him away when he found her in rooms she'd believed were empty. That told me something I filed carefully away. On the 23rd day of the new assignment, I was posted outside the blue drawing room when the door opened and, Marcus came through it, and, behind him Catherine, and, behind her, nobody. The room behind them was empty. Which meant whatever had been in that room before they left it was no longer there. Marcus caught my eye. Gave me a look I knew how to read, steady, alert, nothing overt. Catherine stopped 2 feet from me. "Officer Mehta," she said. "Ma'am." She looked at me for a moment. The measuring look. The look that was doing several calculations at once. "Tell me," she said. "In your professional experience. When things become," she paused, chose a word, "complicated. What do you do?" I thought about it. "I find the thing in the room," I said. "The one that isn't going anywhere. The Van Dyke. The corgi. Something that doesn't require anything from me. And, I look at it until I can see the rest of the room clearly." She was quiet. "That's a reasonable approach," she said, finally. She walked on. Marcus fell in beside her. I watched the space where she'd been. The blue drawing room door was still slightly open. Inside, barely visible through the gap, a single chair was pulled 2 feet out of alignment from the table. Nobody had pushed it back. That chair had been there the whole time, quietly marking the shape of whatever had happened. Rooms remember. Even when everyone in them decides they don't. On the 31st day, I came off a night shift at 6 in the morning and walked through the east courtyard in the flat grey light that belongs exclusively to early November in England, the light that has no warmth in it, no promise, just the plain fact of visibility, and found Catherine on one of the stone benches by the fountain. She was wearing a coat over what appeared to be pajamas. Her feet were in Wellingtons. She was holding a mug of something that was steaming, which meant she'd been outside long enough for the steam to become conspicuous. Geoffrey was asleep on her feet. She looked at me when I came through the gate. Did not seem alarmed. Did not reach for the composed face. "Off duty?" she asked. "Just finishing, ma'am." She looked at the mug. "I couldn't sleep. This happens." I nodded. Stayed where I was. "You're allowed to go," she said. "You're off duty." "I know, ma'am." A beat. "But, you're going to stand there anyway." "The bench has room, ma'am, if you'd prefer I weren't hovering." She looked at the bench. At the space beside her. At Geoffrey's current occupation of approximately 40% of the available room. "He'll move," she said. "He's pretending." I sat down. Jeffrey opened one eye, assessed me, decided I was neither a threat nor a tapestry, and closed it again. We sat in the gray light. The fountain was turned off for winter. The courtyard smelled of wet stone and something green and cold underneath it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Not a question in the way she said it. "Ma'am." "What do you see," she said, "when you look at all of this?" She didn't gesture. She didn't need to. All of this was the stones. The walls. The weight. I thought about it honestly. "I see something very old," I said. "That is trying very hard to survive itself." She turned her head and looked at me. "And the people in it," I said. "I see people who agreed to belong to something that does not belong to them in return." The gray light sat on everything. "That's," she started. Stopped. Looked back at the fountain. "That's a more accurate description than most." Jeffrey shifted on her feet. She put a hand on him. "The tour," she said. "Canberra. The photograph. The program with the names." She stopped. I waited. "It sounds so small," she said. "When you say it." "Most of the things that aren't small sound small when you say them," I said. She considered that. "It's not the names," she said. "It's," and then, she stopped again, and I watched her decide not to finish the sentence, and I watched her decide not to explain why she wasn't finishing it, and I watched her decide to be satisfied with all of that. "I know," I said. Because I did. As much as a person can know someone else's interior. She looked at me sideways. A different look than the measuring one. Less calculation, more, I searched for the word recognition. The look of a person who has found, in an unlikely place, someone whose understanding of the room matches theirs. "You're going to be good at this," she said. I wasn't sure what this was. The assignment. The morning. The bench. The ongoing project of surviving something old and enormous and convinced of its own necessity. "I hope so, ma'am." Jeffrey stood up abruptly, stretched, sneezed on my trousers with the conviction of a dog who has never been wrong about anything, and walked back toward the castle door. Catherine stood. Pulled her coat tighter. "He always knows when it's time to go in," she said. "I've never understood how." She followed the dog. The door closed behind them both. I sat in the courtyard in the gray light with wet trousers and a mug's worth of November air, and I thought about rooms. About the things they remember. About what it costs to belong to something so much larger than yourself that the belonging never ends, never pauses, never gives you back the person you were before you agreed to it. About hands spread open at their sides. About spines making decisions. About what it means to find a fixed point in a room that is always, in every way that counts, moving. The fountain was off. The water was still. Somewhere inside, a corgi was eating something priceless. Some things, I thought, you just learned a workaround. Harlan told me about the Canberra trip on a Wednesday. By Thursday, the internet had already decided what the trip meant. This is something you cannot explain to anyone who has not worked in this environment. The gap between the thing that happens and the story that gets built around the thing that happens is not a gap at all. It is a chasm. It is geological. The story arrives before the thing sometimes, precedes it, shapes it, and then explains it in retrospect with the calm authority of a narrator who was there all along. The story the internet had built was this: tension between the Princess of Wales and the Queen Consort. Sources close to the palace. Insiders report. A rift, widening. The word rift appeared in 4 separate outlets within 6 hours of each other, which tells you either that there was genuine coordinated briefing or that everyone had agreed, independently and simultaneously, on the most dramatically satisfying word available. I read these things on my phone at 6:58 a.m. with instant coffee that tasted of obligation and thought, the people who write this have never been in those rooms. Then, I thought, most of the people in those rooms wish they hadn't been either. The pre-tour briefings were held in the conference room adjacent to the communications office. I attended the first two as an observer, new to the detail, absorbing protocol, learning the specific choreography of a major overseas engagement. Who stood where? Who arrived first? Who was photographed together and who was not? The order of names on programs. The precise distance between vehicles in a motorcade. All of it mattered. None of it was about what it was about. The third briefing, I attended as part of Catherine's immediate security team. There were 14 people in that room. Communications staff. Press secretaries. 2 palace lawyers. Marcus on Catherine's left. Harland at the far end like a man who has witnessed every iteration of every meeting and simply endures them. Catherine sat in the middle of the long table. She had a notepad. She wrote on it occasionally actual notes, specific and practical, not the performance of engagement. When someone said something she disagreed with, she made a small mark on the left margin of the page. By the end of the briefing, there were 7 marks. She did not challenge any of the 7 things in the room. I watched Marcus watch her not challenge them. After the room cleared, he and I were the last 2 in the corridor. He looked at me with the expression of a man transferring a significant amount of information using only his eyebrows. She'll challenge them, he said, at a more strategic moment. I know, I said. He nodded. She's been doing this for 23 years, he said. Not to explain her. To remind me. To make sure I understood what 23 years of picking the strategic moment looked like from the inside. The marks in the margin, I said. 7, he confirmed. We walked down the corridor. Jeffrey ate a briefing document last month, Marcus said. The advanced team's risk assessment for the Perth engagement. 312 pages. All of it? The cover page and the first 6. He has editorial standards. I thought about a corgi with editorial standards and decided it was possibly the most relatable thing about the entire institution. The Canberra trip was 8 days out when I first understood what Harland had meant by pressures not publicly visible. I was on a close proximity rotation, which means within the same room or an immediately adjacent one. The apartment within the palace. The kitchen in which Catherine was doing something so aggressively normal it had its own gravitational field, making tea, actually making it, filling the kettle, waiting for it, the whole sequence, when her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it. The screen faced up. She looked at it for 4 seconds. Then, she turned back to the kettle. The kettle came to boil. She poured the water. She watched it steep. She picked up the mug. And, then, she put it down without drinking from it and pressed both palms flat against the counter and looked at the tiled backsplash. The backsplash had a small chip in one tile, third from the left, second row from the counter, the kind of thing you notice when you're looking at the backsplash with great intention because you cannot look at the phone. I had my back to the doorframe. I was watching the hallway. Priya, she said. First name. I had now accumulated 2 instances of first name in 38 days. I was cataloging them. Ma'am. Does it ever? She stopped. Start it again. In your job. Does it ever happen that you're placed somewhere because someone else can't stand to be somewhere? Is that a thing that occurs? I thought about the mechanics of her question. About what she was actually asking. You mean, I said carefully, is it possible that the way a person is protected can be used to manage what they're exposed to? What conversations they're part of? What rooms they're permitted to enter? Silence from the direction of the backsplash. Yes, she said. That is what I mean. I considered the 11 years. The protocol documents. The incident reports. The way certain postings arrived with no explanation and other postings were explained at significant length. The way Marcus had been assigned to her 8 years ago in circumstances that he had, on one occasion after 3 glasses of something at a Christmas event that we did not officially attend, described as politically convenient for everyone except him. It happens, I said. Another silence. The tour, she said. Ma'am. The schedule was revised. She picked up the mug. 3 days ago. The joint engagement in Canberra. The state dinner. She turned from the backsplash. I was removed from the table plan. She said it with such precision. Such flatness. The sentence carrying its own weight without any assistance from the voice delivering it. Removed from the table plan. In the language of this world, in the world of programs and precedents and who stood where in photographs, that sentence was a paragraph. That sentence was a chapter. That sentence was something done by someone with the authority to do it and the willingness to use that authority in this particular way at this particular moment. I see, I said. I found out, she said, from the communications secretary. Who was very sorry. Who expressed his apologies with the energy of a man who understood that he was delivering a message on behalf of a decision he had not made and could not reverse. She drank from the mug. He used the word logistical, she said. 3 times. People say words more than once when they don't believe them, I said. She looked at me. Yes, she said. They do. Here is what I knew about Camilla Parker Bowles, who had been queen consort for a year and a half and carried the title with the particular burden of a woman who had spent decades being the story before she became the institution. I knew what was in the files. The public record. The decades of navigation. The long road from the most unpopular woman in Britain to a coronation. None of that, frankly, was my business or my brief. What I knew from standing in rooms was this: she was formidable. She was funny in the way very intelligent people are funny when they have decided that nothing is worth being humorless about. She had a relationship with the king that was, and I measure this professionally, genuine, in the way that very little in this world is genuinely anything. And she was, in certain configurations, afraid. Not of people. Not of situations. Afraid of the thing that several decades of public life had drilled into her as a permanent condition, the knowledge that she had arrived at everything she had through a path that many people would never forgive. That fear manifested, when it manifested, as control. And control, when it collided with a woman who had also learned to manage her own fear through a different kind of discipline. Catherine's discipline, the discipline of the 7 margin marks, the strategic moment, the spine deciding, produced what Harland would call, in his incident report, an unscheduled interpersonal escalation. It produced what I would call, and did call, in my own private log, which no one would ever read, 2 women standing in the same institution with the same unspoken wound, which was, I gave something enormous to belong here, and I am still not sure it was taken seriously. That wound, in my experience, produces the most complicated collisions. I was told about the Blue Room meeting by Marcus, on the morning of the 5th day before the tour. I was not in the Blue Room. I was posted outside it, in the corridor, with a woman named Sergeant Claire Hodges who had 11 years of her own and the useful ability to be entirely non-communicative while standing very close to someone for extended periods. Marcus was inside. What he told me afterward was abbreviated. He told me there had been a discussion about the table plan revision. That Catherine had raised it directly. That Camilla had, and, here he paused and used a word I had not heard him use before, which was combusted. She lost her composure, he said. I waited. Not, he chose the rest carefully. Not through anger. More, I think it surprised her. That Catherine raised it directly. I think she'd anticipated the 7 margin marks. The strategic moment. She hadn't anticipated being asked, plainly and quietly, to explain herself. And she couldn't, I said. She could. He corrected me. She had reasons. Logistical reasons. Tour management reasons. 3 separate logistical reasons that were technically valid. But Catherine didn't ask for the reasons. She asked for the decision. And, those are different questions. The second one doesn't have a logistical answer. I thought about Catherine in the kitchen with her palms on the counter. What happened after, I said. The meeting ended. Both of them were contained. Professional. He paused. HRH the princess left first. I walked with her to the corridor. And, then, He looked at me. She went left, he said. Toward the long gallery wing. I looked at him. He looked at me. Not the long gallery specifically, he said. That would be coincidental. Of course it would, I said. She walked for approximately 12 minutes, he said. Then, she came back. Had a meeting with her communications secretary. Made 3 phone calls. Prepared a briefing document. The margin marks, I said. 7 new ones, he said. She was back on the table plan by the following Tuesday. The announcement, if you could call a quietly revised digital document an announcement, which you could not, arrived in the tour schedules at 11:43 a.m. A communications assistant forwarded it to Marcus. Marcus forwarded it to me with no accompanying text. I was in the East Corridor when I read it on my phone. I was covering a gap in rotation for Hodges, who had a dental appointment, and the specific resentment of a person who had been attempting to schedule a dental appointment for 6 weeks. I read the email. I put my phone away. 2 minutes later, Catherine came around the corner. She was walking with purpose, not away from something, toward something, a different energy entirely, the walk of a person who has accomplished a thing. She had a folder under her arm. Her communications secretary was 4 steps behind her, texting with both thumbs and the concentration of a man defusing a bomb. She saw me. Didn't stop. But, slowed enough. Anything to report, Officer Mehta? Quiet morning, ma'am. She almost smiled. The almost smile had become something I could read now, the specific variety of it that contained private information. Good, she said. She walked past. The communications secretary sailed past behind her, still texting, and, I thought, somewhere in this building there is a revised table plan, and, somewhere in this building there is a woman who either knows about it yet or is about to, and, the space between those 2 moments is a thing I would very much prefer not to be standing in. Officer Mehta, Catherine said, from 3 steps ahead. She hadn't turned. Ma'am. The corgi, she said. He was asking after you. She turned the corner. I stood in the corridor. Jeffrey had not been in the same room as me in 11 days, and dogs do not ask after people, which is either a biological limitation or a deliberate choice on their part. I've never been sure. But I understood what she was telling me. The conversation in the kitchen. The palms on the counter. The 4 seconds looking at the phone. The 7 margin marks. She wasn't alone in any of it. And she needed someone in this building who knew she wasn't alone in it. I was being told, that is you. The information settled somewhere in my chest, not quite warm, not quite heavy, something between the two, the weight of being trusted with a thing that had no name in any briefing document and no formal protocol and no precedent I had been trained to follow. I'd signed up to stand in corridors and know where the exits were. I had not signed up to be the fixed point. But there it was. The night before the tour, I was on a late shift and I walked the East Wing circuit alone at 2 in the morning, and in the long gallery I stopped under the Van Dyke. Charles I on horseback. Imperious. Oblivious. The tapestry at the far end had been sent for conservation. Henry Tudor's leg was presumably being restored to its pre-Jeffrey condition by someone with very fine tools and no knowledge of the events that had necessitated the repair. The gallery was empty. I looked up at the painting. The horse's left nostril was, still, extraordinary. I thought about what Catherine had asked me in the courtyard. What do you see when you look at all of this? I thought about my answer, and whether it was still accurate. Something very old, trying to survive itself. People who had agreed to belong to something that did not belong to them. Yes. Still accurate. But there was something else now. Something I hadn't seen from the outside. These people, the ones inside the institution, the ones breathing its weighted air, the ones who had walked into rooms 20 years ago and agreed to the terms, they were also fighting it. Quietly. In kitchen silences and margin marks and strategic moments and the particular kind of walk that covers ground while appearing not to move. They were trying to reshape the thing that contained them using only the pressure of steady persistence. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't look like resistance. It looked like a woman putting her palms flat on a counter and deciding to ask a direct question. It looked like getting back onto the table plan. The gallery lights were low. The painting was very dark at the edges. I thought, in 20 years, what will be the thing this period is remembered for? What will someone standing in a room like this understand about right now that we can't see yet, because we're in it? I didn't know. But, I thought, the fixed points. The people who chose them. That would matter somehow. In the accounting of it. In whatever came next. I turned out of the gallery. Somewhere in the East Wing, a corgi was either sleeping or committing a conservation crime, and tomorrow there would be a motorcade and a plane and a table in Canberra with a name on it, earned through 7 marks in a margin and 1 direct question and 23 years of walking into rooms without flinching. Some mornings the work is simple. Stand here. Watch the corridor. This was not one of those mornings. But I was starting to understand that the other kind, the kind with weight in it, the kind that asked something real of the person doing it, those were the ones worth showing up for. The flight to Australia is 23 hours. I know this the way I know all distances in my profession, not as geography but as time, as the stretch of duration that must be managed before you can do the thing you flew 23 hours to do. In my world, distance is always about what comes after. I slept for 4 of those hours, in a seat that was better than anything I had grown up understanding as possible and less comfortable than I would have needed to genuinely rest. The rest of the team rotated in similar increments. Marcus slept like a man who had learned years ago to sleep anywhere, the way soldiers do, the way people do when their bodies have been trained to accept rest as a resource rather than a luxury. Catherine did not sleep. I know this because I was awake for 19 of the 23 hours and she was awake for all of them that I observed. She worked. She read. She spoke to her communications secretary in intervals. She walked to the rear of the aircraft twice, standing at the window over the long black of the Pacific, and I know what the Pacific looks like at 38,000 feet in the dark. I have looked at it, and I know what a person's back looks like when they are gathering something from a view that is too vast to demand anything back from them. She was gathering. She came back to her seat both times with the composure settled more firmly than when she'd left it. The gathered thing visible in her posture, in the set of her jaw, in the way she opened the next document in the folder and made her marks. I watched this and thought, there are people who collapse toward the thing that frightens them, and there are people who walk toward it and take what they need from it and come back with it banked against the hours ahead. She was the second kind. 23 years of practice. Canberra in November is 31 degrees and aggressively sunny, the kind of sun that interrogates you. The motorcade from the airport was 40 minutes. I was in the 4th vehicle. The choreography of the arrival was exactly what the advance team had scripted, the sequence of vehicles, the positions, the crowd management, the line of photographers arranged behind barriers, already crouching, already angled, already waiting for the shot that would become the story. The story they were waiting for was the joint appearance. The first public appearance of Catherine and Camilla together since the reports of the rift, that word, still circulating, still being deployed with the unearned confidence of a word that had proven useful. Joint appearance. Same photograph. Same program. Names in a particular order. This is what I had come 23 hours to stand near. Marcus was ahead of me as we moved into position. He caught my eye once, briefly. His expression was the professional one, alert, settled, unreadable in the way that is itself a form of communication. It said, "We are here. This is the work. Whatever happens next, we are here." I took my position. I want to tell you about a thing that happens in public-facing situations where the institutional stakes are high. The air changes. Not metaphorically. Actually. The people in the room, the staff, the photographers, the officials, the crowd held back behind the velvet barriers, they create a pressure. The expectation of something has a physical property, a density. You can feel it against your skin. I have felt it in front of operating theaters and, in the seconds before verdicts and, in that particular held-breath moment before a significant person walks through a significant door. The door at the far end of the reception hall opened. Camilla entered first. This was correct per protocol. She was queen consort, she had precedence, she entered first. She was wearing something in a deep green that I noticed because 3 of the photographers audibly refocused. She moved with the authority of a woman who understood that every room she entered had been waiting for her in some sense for a very long time, and had decided to treat that as a fact rather than a judgment. She looked well. Composed. Alert in the way she was always alert, a bright, restless attention that she wore like a piece of jewelry. And, behind her, Catherine. In the specific blue that photographed like a declaration. The room did the thing rooms do, that slight collective exhalation, the recalibration of attention. 2 women. 1 moment. The story being written in real time by 47 cameras all making the same calculation. They stood 3 feet apart. They turned to face the same direction. And, here is what I want to tell you, because it is the thing I have thought about most in the months since it is the thing I wrote about in my personal log at 4 in the morning in a Canberra hotel room with the air conditioning doing its best against the November heat. They looked at each other. It was not a camera moment. It was the half second before the camera moment, the quarter beat of the musician's tuning before the piece begins. The photographers hadn't found it yet. The officials were still arranging themselves. The crowd noise was covering everything. In that half second, Camilla turned her head toward Catherine and Catherine turned her head toward Camilla, and what passed between them was not warmth and it was not coldness and it was not the performed professionalism of 2 people doing a job. It was recognition. The kind that happens between people who are carrying the same thing in different containers. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then, the photographers found them and the cameras came up and both faces settled into the practiced version and the moment was gone, archived somewhere in the space between the institutional and the private that has no name in any protocol document. I stood in my position. My hands were still. My face was the professional face. Inside I was something between shaken and awed and I could not have told you which was more, or why. The state dinner was that evening. The table had 24 settings. Catherine was at the 3rd seat from the head on the left side. The program had her name in the correct order. These things, which had been the subject of a meeting and a blue room confrontation and 7 margin marks and a direct question that had made a composed woman combust, existed now as simple material facts. Place cards. Printed programs. The physical evidence of a decision that had been unmade and remade. I was posted near the east entrance. The dinner proceeded with the formality of events that have been refined over centuries, the particular rhythm of courses and speeches and toasts, the way conversation at a table like that exists on 2 levels simultaneously, the diplomatic and the personal, the thing being said and the thing being negotiated. At some point during the 2nd course, I had a clear sightline to Catherine. She was speaking to the man on her left, an Australian minister of something. I had his name in my briefing materials, it escaped me now. She was animated. Actually animated, the specific version of it that came through the gathered composure on long difficult evenings, the lean forward, the gesture with the fork that nearly became more of a gesture than intended, the laugh that was genuine enough to crinkle. I looked at this for a moment. Then, I looked at the table plan on the wall. Then, I looked back. 23 years. The margin marks. The strategic moments. The palms flat on the counter. The direct question in the blue room. The 23 hours of gathering over the Black Pacific. And, here, a chair at a table. A place card. An animated conversation about something that probably mattered to the person she was talking to and might have mattered to her or might not have, because Catherine had long ago learned to give every conversation the weight of a conversation that mattered, which is its own kind of extraordinary skill. The chair had been earned. But, she didn't look like someone who had earned something. She looked like someone who had simply arrived. Like the chair had always been hers and the preceding events were irrelevant. I thought, that is also a skill. The ability to sit in the place you fought for without wearing the fight on your face. Maybe the most important one. Harlan pulled me aside on the third day for a debrief. We were in a conference room in the official residence, smaller than the London equivalent, the carpet a different shade of institutional beige. He had 2 coffees. This was becoming a ritual. I accepted mine. Observations, he said. In this context, observations meant everything I had seen that was not in any official report. The gap between the thing and the story. Positive, I said. Overall. He waited. The joint appearances, I said. There's less. I searched for the right word. The tension in the room is different. From the first day to today. Something shifted. Shifted how? I thought about the half-second before the cameras found them. The recognition. I think, I said carefully, that some things are easier to be in conflict about from a distance. In the same room, in the same country, doing the same job. It becomes harder to maintain a particular narrative about the other person. Harlan looked at me. You're describing proximity as a conflict resolution mechanism, he said. I'm describing it as a complicating factor, I said. In any conflict. Between any people. It's harder to be certain about someone when you can see their hands. He was quiet. Both of them, I said. The hands were easier on day 3. Than on day 1. He drank his coffee. Poetic, he said. Occupational habit, I said. I spend a lot of time watching rooms. You spend, he said, a lot of time standing in the gap between what's supposed to happen and what actually happens. And making a judgment call about what that means. I suppose I do, sir. Is that, he said, what you signed up for? I thought about the East Courtyard in November. The gray light. A mug of something steaming. A corgi on someone's feet. What do you see when you look at all of this? Something very old, trying to survive itself. No, I said. But, it's what I turned out to be useful for. I'll take it. On the last day in Canberra, there was an unscheduled private engagement. This is not unusual. Unscheduled private engagements are built into the margins of public tours, time preserved for the things that emerge, the relationships that need maintenance, the conversations that cannot be public. My job in these moments is, be near, be invisible, be ready. The meeting was between Catherine and Camilla. The king was present for approximately 14 minutes and, then, was not present, which is its own kind of communication, a significant decision wearing the costume of a scheduling coincidence. I was outside the door. I could hear almost nothing. Voices. The occasional movement of furniture. At one point, clearly, something, I thought, a laugh. Short. Then, silence. Then, what might have been 2 people laughing, briefly, and, then, the silence of people who have acknowledged something together and decided to leave it where they found it. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. Camilla left first. She passed me in the corridor. Her expression was the professional one, settled and composed, but she was holding a coffee cup, a plain one, not the porcelain of official engagements, a ceramic mug from the kitchen, and she had her thumb hooked through the handle in the casual way, the way you hold a mug in your own kitchen. She glanced at me. "Officer," she said. "Ma'am." She walked on. 40 seconds later, Catherine came through the door. She saw me. Stopped. We had, by this point, accumulated a number of these corridor moments. They existed in a register that had no official name. Not friendship. Not professional relationship exactly, though it was that also. Something that had built incrementally through shared rooms and grey courtyards and long galleys and the ongoing project of being useful to each other in ways that the institution had no protocol for. "How are we looking out here?" she said. "Quiet, ma'am." She nodded. She looked down the corridor in the direction Camilla had gone. "She takes it black," Catherine said. "The coffee. I didn't know that." I waited. 20 years of sharing this, she gestured in that way that meant everything, the institution, the rooms, the weight of it, and I didn't know how she took her coffee. She said it with something that was not quite wonder and not quite grief. The tone of a person recalibrating a thing they thought they had mapped completely. You know now, I said. She looked at me. I know now, she agreed. She turned down the corridor. I stood in the doorframe. 47 minutes. A laugh, possibly two. A ceramic mug held casually. The gap between the story and the thing. We landed back in London at 6:40 in the morning. The light was the same grey as always, the English November light that does not perform for anyone. I was on a vehicle in the motorcade, watching the M4 in the near dark, the other cars on the motorway going about their ordinary complicated lives, aware of nothing adjacent to them. I thought about my log. I had kept it since the second week of the assignment. A personal record, illegible to anyone but me, full of abbreviations and half-sentences and the observations I was not going to put in official documents. 7 margin marks. Palms on counters. Gray courtyard light. The acoustic properties of a room where something important was happening. I had never kept a log before on any assignment. I thought about why I had started. I thought, because this one mattered differently. Because I had been placed, somehow, in the space between two ongoing stories, Catherine's story, Camilla's story, and the space between those stories was where the real thing was happening. The thing that didn't make the reports. The thing that would show up, maybe, in 20 years, in some retrospective account written by someone who had access to all the documents and none of the rooms. They would know the table plan revision. The Blue Room meeting. The tour. The photographs. They would not know about the kettle. The mug held casually in a corridor. The laugh that might have been two laughs. I was the only one writing those things down. I didn't know what that meant. Whether it meant anything. Whether my private log was a form of witness or just the habit of a person who had discovered, too late to reverse it, that she cared about what she was watching. Both, maybe. A week after the tour, I was back on rotation in London. Standard Post. The East Wing. Nothing of note. Catherine came through at 14:12. Standard Movement, Communications Secretary 2 steps back, heading to a meeting. She passed me. Did not stop. 2 steps past me, she turned. The tapestry, she said. I looked at her. Henry Tudor's leg, she said. The conservators finished. Apparently it's better than it was before Geoffrey ate it. She said this with the private almost smile, the one that contained information. Adversity, I said. As a conservation method, she agreed. She kept walking. The communications secretary, sailing past behind her, gave me the look of a man who had long since stopped attempting to understand the conversations that happened in his vicinity and had made peace with that. I watched her turn the corner. Henry Tudor's leg was better than before. The tapestry had been eaten and repaired, and the repair had, apparently, improved it. I stood in the corridor. Thought about that. About eaten things and repaired things and whether the repair, if it went well enough, became indistinguishable from the original or whether it left a seam, some small trace in the fiber, visible only to the person who knew what to look for, who had been in the room when the corgi was doing his worst. Both possibilities seemed like enough. More than enough. I turned back to my post. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere in the East Wing, Geoffrey was either sleeping or planning. The institution continued, as it always had, to be very old and to try very hard to survive itself. I stood in my position. Watched the hallway. Let the morning be a morning. Later, months later, in a different country, covering a different engagement, standing in a corridor outside a room where voices were doing the complicated work of people trying to understand each other, I would think back to the beginning of it. The long gallery. Henry Tudor's leg. A woman pressing the back of her hand to her mouth under a Van Dyck painting. I would think, the moment that changes a thing almost never looks like the moment that changes a thing. It looks like a corridor. A morning. A fixed point in a room that is, in every way that counts, still moving. It looks like standing there anyway. I filed my final report on the Canberra tour at 11:43 a.m. on a Wednesday. There were no incidents of note. This is accurate. Accurate the way the surface of water is accurate, what it shows you, and what it covers, and everything moving underneath. My personal log runs to 46 pages. It will not be read by anyone. Except me, on mornings when I need to remember what the work actually is.